We've started to interview people, and have you listened to any of them yet?
No.
Okay, that's fine. You don't have to. We kind of just, Aaron and I talk about different topics that are hopefully relevant. And then I thought about you specifically when Aaron was asking for a list of people, and you seem to be not only opinionated, but an expert in a lot of fields. So
I have a lot of opinions, yes.
Yep, I love that.
That's good.
So I guess I'd love to first give some background to who you are and what your specialty is, because you're a doctor.
I'm a family medicine doctor, and I've been practicing for 40 years. I saw families for probably 35 years of that. But I'm now doing correctional medicine. I don't see children anymore, but of course I did for a long time.
Yeah. And yeah, because I remember Rachel talking about it a long time ago when she was younger, because my wife has known you longer than I have. Even though Tom and I go pretty far back with some pretty awesome, amazing conversations, and this guy's kind of rocked my world on my thinking on a lot of different things. So, excuse me, my microphone's stupid cord likes to come unplugged.
So, Aaron, how old is the baby?
Baby is a week old. So he was born on June 13th. Very fresh, newborn.
How's mom doing?
She's good. We're both kind of in the same boat. We were 30 plus when we had him. So I feel like we were both really set in our ways and we had our routines. And so it was a struggle.
The routines will change, of course, but
yeah,
you've got a jillion decisions to make over the next 20 years.
Yeah.
And the ones at the beginning are the easy ones.
Yeah. Well, we're just hanging on at this point. We're just trying to figure out how we're ever going to sleep again. So.
Yeah. There's all kinds of books written about don't let the baby sleep with you. It's written by men who don't breastfeed.
Good to know.
So you can do what you want about that.
Well, that's actually really interesting because last night was kind of this breaking point where we were like, he does not sleep where we want him to sleep. And when we put him in bed with us for 5-10 minutes, he passes right out and we go, but we feel like we're doing something really taboo, you know, but it works. So we're struggling with that.
Talk to my wife and she will tell you this will give the baby a sense of security.
Good to know. And the risk isn't as bad as everyone says then, yeah?
I have never heard of a child being injured in the night by the parents.
Yeah.
By rolling over on the baby.
You know, an interesting thing that I just heard not too long ago was up until about 1991 or 92 that I don't know if it was encouraged, but it was accepted that babies go to sleep on their stomachs as well. Is that something you're aware of, Tom? That
was recommended for a very long time based upon armchair reasoning only. And there isn't any hard evidence to support that or to negate it. I think that current recommendations, and I'm not very current, is to sleep on their side. But you know, babies flop around at night.
Yeah.
So they may start out in one position, end up in 2 or 3 others before the night's over. Like adults, we all move around at night too.
Yeah. Well, my gut feeling on it has been a little more commonsensical, and my wife has been a little bit more by the book. So we're kind of having a little bit of an impasse with certain things. But for instance, sleeping in the bed is a big one right now where I go, if he sleeps in the bed, sleep in the bed. Like, let us get some shut-eye. But she's pretty steadfast right now, but I think her will's getting broken slowly but surely.
Have her talk to my wife.
Yeah, I will. Yeah, absolutely.
Actually, she'll be in before long, and she'll be glad to chime in on this. She's very opinionated about this.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. We love that.
I don't have an opinion. I defer to her about this.
She would love that. Yeah.
Well, Tom, I'd love to ask you a couple questions that I think might go in a couple different directions, just depending on, I think, how you answer them or what our thoughts are on them. But I think right now with this whole coronavirus going on, and or the pandemic that's happening,
right?
And there's quite a few different theories, science, doctors coming out on a lot of different things. And right now, there's a lot of people that are stuck in their homes due to medical reasonings and they say, until you have a vaccine, I can't, I just should be at home. And I've heard I actually have a family friend who the doctor advised them, hey, until there's a vaccine, you can't leave your house. And so then it lends to, okay, well, the only way for us to cure this pandemic is to have a vaccine, which I've heard that too. And so you go, okay, well, once they have that vaccine, how many will partake in it? And then will states make it mandatory? And I know right now on the docket in Colorado, they're talking about once the vaccine comes out that mandatory might be a loosely based term, but a form of it being mandatory. And
Yeah.
so,
well, I don't think they can mandate in the sense of threatening jail if you don't. I think strong recommendations are probably is politically the only thing that will work. Understand this particular virus has a name, and it is the same kind of virus as the common cold. Now, there are several thousand deaths a year from people dying of the common cold. They get pneumonia or some other significant complication, and there are several thousand deaths a year. Which makes this one is just kind of worse than average, and some would say quite a bit worse than average, but at worst, it's like twice as bad as average. The influenza kills 20 to 50,000 people a year. We've got 120,000 so far on this virus.
120,000 dead on this virus in the United States?
Yes, in the United States so far this year. And there's probably going to be another 20 or 30,000 before it's all over. I don't know. Nobody really can predict this. The vaccine will not cure it. There is no cure for the common cold.
Well, I guess that's where I get a little hung up, because there is a flu vaccine, right? That comes out every year.
Yes.
And every year it's a little bit different because the flu kind of changes. And
right.
Then there's always a percentage of effectiveness that the flu vaccine has. And I've heard numbers thrown out there from 15 to 30%, and you could probably give me a more accurate picture
well,
of that.
When you make up a vaccine, you're sort of trying to guess what the characteristics of this virus will be at the molecular level. And they have a tendency to change over time. They mutate. And so you put out a vaccine that's taken several months to develop. During that time, the virus may mutate. And so your vaccine will be very effective or less effective depending upon how that goes. No vaccine is 100% effective about these viruses. What we do know is that before we had these things, the death rate was roughly twice that. That varies from year to year. So the vaccines are really very helpful, but they're not any kind of panacea. They do make a difference. The risk of them is quite low because you're not getting the virus, you're getting a chunk of the virus. They sort of chop the virus up, so to speak, and you expose your immune system to pieces of the virus, and that's enough to help your body kill it.
So, I mean, if it's only a percentage and it's not super accurate in your mind, before we go into whether you feel like it should be mandated or not, what is the way to mitigate or kind of end the pandemic that's going on right now?
Well, the pandemic will eventually, I don't know the right term here, burn itself out. It will eventually get to the whole population. Everyone will be exposed sooner or later over the years, and it'll take several years to do that. And of course, there's a few people that are real sensitive to this virus. Their body has never seen anything quite like it. And a few of those people get really, really sick. Most of those people, like 99+%, will get over the virus, fight it off, and now have antibodies to protect themselves against future similar viruses. So think of viruses as a molecular shape. And just for a metaphor, think of fruits. They come in many, many different shapes. Our body's immune system recognizes the shape of the virus, or actually a piece of the virus. Trucks going by somewhere.
Sounds like a lawnmower.
Yeah, I can hear it.
There you go.
I'm going to move.
And so you get a real boost to your immune system by getting the vaccine. Now, the vaccines have been really very, very helpful. There are some vaccines that are like terrific. For instance, hepatitis B is almost gone because it's such a great vaccine. Now, what I've heard about COVID-19 is that it is a very complex virus and doesn't seem to be mutating a lot. So there is hope, fingers crossed, that the vaccine will be effective for most people. Now, we don't know when that's going to be out. That depends on research and development. I don't have any insight into that. I'm told like 6 months, maybe a little longer.
I'm curious, and I guess this goes to either of you guys. We're currently experiencing a lot of people talking about the second wave of it coming. And so right now they're doubling down on their, everyone has to wear a mask, and they're starting the second wave of precautions that the public needs to take. I'm curious if, particularly you, Tom, if you feel like this second wave is valid, or is this something that we ought to not be concerned about as strongly as the first wave?
Well, I don't know how concerned you were with the first wave, but the medical community was scared to death with the first wave because the death rate looked like it could be in the several percentage range, like 3 to 6%, which translate to millions of people dying. It turns out that as we got more information, the number is much smaller than that. And in fact, currently the death rate is like 1/3 or 1/4 of 1%. So out of 1,000 people who get the virus, you get like 3 or 4 deaths.
So why is it that you, in your professional opinion, think that this pandemic was treated so differently than previous pandemics? Like we experienced, I think swine
H1N1.
flu was one, H1N1 or swine flu. It didn't seem to be as intense and divisive as this one. What do you attribute that to? I'm curious.
Oh, yeah, that's a really good question. But the early information on this was coming out of places that had it really bad, and there were a lot of deaths. And so that really, really scared people because it turns out that most of those people who were dying were the elderly. Yes, there were some young people, and that has kept its pace through time. Most of the people who die from this are older and have comorbidities. Yes, there are some young people who die from this, but they're very, very, very few. You're talking numbers like 1 in 2,000, 1 in 10,000 sort of numbers. A lot of people get exposure to the virus, develop antibodies, and never even get sick. The swine flu hurt young people as well as older people. This one seems to have a predilection for the elderly and sort of spares the younger. And so hopefully that will be good news to a wife and baby. I do think that it's very smart to wear a mask out in public until we get a vaccine. Because
why is that?
The only thing you can really do is minimize exposure. The only way you can have no exposure is nobody leaves the house. But somebody's got to go out and go to work, go shopping. I mean, you can't have zero exposure or zero risk for exposure.
So what effects do you think I don't know if it was a 1.5-month shutdown, in some places it's ongoing. Do you have concerns about the effect of that on the population? Like the fact that we went into a basically economic shutdown and we had the stay-at-home order. Do you worry about the long-term effects of that?
Well, there's a lot of people concerned about that because drug abuse has risen, drinking has risen, suicides have risen, and it's sort of not, I don't know how to word this. It doesn't seem to be a wise decision to shut the whole economy down for what's really just a nasty virus. Yes, it's nastier than average. Yes, it's maybe even used to scare everybody, but it's not like going to get everybody. It's going to get some people, and that's going to happen eventually. The big scare at first was that the hospitals would be actually overwhelmed and unable to care for their patients. And that was what caused the shutdown initially. Was we got to dampen the curve. We've got to, instead of a big spike up and down, we want to make it a slower spike so that we can at least handle the patient load. Okay, we have accomplished that. Now, as people get out and start doing more, yeah, we're going to see some more cases. I don't know about a second wave that's pure guesswork, and a lot of guesses have gone bad. That doesn't mean this one will be bad.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, there's going to be more cases over time.
Doesn't
Even
that become
with the vaccine, there's going to be some cases.
Doesn't that become kind of problematic when their doctors or the experts are speaking to the American public and the outcomes or the guesswork has been so wrong and so off base that now you have people who are
Right.
just going, oh, I don't believe any of it, so I don't want to wear a mask. I don't want to participate. I'm going to just totally disregard everything.
I understand that feeling, and that's a very legitimate feeling, because we look kind of silly sometimes when we try to be prophets, because we're not really prophets. You know, you take your best estimate based upon the information you have. As we get more information, we can change our estimates. And there's also difference of opinion among doctors about how we ought to react to this. Some people say, look, everybody's going to get exposed sooner or later. We may as well get it over with. Others say, no, we need to slow this down until we get a vaccine, because there's some vulnerable people out there that you want to protect.
But aren't those vulnerable people vulnerable to just all the other things that we talked about, H1N1 and then influenza and those other things? So wouldn't it be, and I'm just playing maybe a other side of the coin type person, wouldn't it be more prudent to say, rather than everybody wearing masks and shutting the economy down, saying, hey, if you have a compromised immune system or you're of a certain age group that's highly affected, you need to be limited on where you go, rather than just putting a blanketed statement saying the whole population has to wear masks. I mean, and that was what was mandated this morning in Oregon. Everybody's got to wear a mask, right?
When you're out mixing with the public, especially indoor encounters. Outdoors, not quite so important, but indoors, that's where the most exposure happens. You know, the thing about wearing a mask is it's not a big deal, and it does seem to make a difference. Now, I can't tell you if it makes a big difference or a little difference, but it does. Hand washing. I mean, when you go overseas and travel, you take precautions because you can get exposed to germs over there that you're not going to expose to here. You don't have immunity to, you're going to get sick. I've got personal experience with that. That was fairly negative, but that's a risk of traveling. You can get a different illness anyway, so cleanliness does helpful. In Japan, they have the habit of wearing masks, and their rate of COVID-19 is much lower than a lot of other countries. So there does seem to be some evidence to support wearing masks.
Okay, can I ask the different kind of masks? I think when you see a lot of Asian cultures who come over here and visit, or when I'm over there, they are wearing a mask, but it always looks like more of a medical mask, where here they kind of mandated a cloth. Well, it doesn't matter. It can be a bandana. It can be your t-shirt over your face. And I've heard that there's a difference between an N95 mask, which actually produces, it actually produces toxins coming out, I think is what they said.
No, it has a better fit.
Better.
The big difference between a medical mask and a regular everyday mask is the medical mask has a tighter fit.
Okay.
So everything you breathe passes through that mask, which also is composed of material that catches more. All you're doing with a mask, though, is you're lowering your risk when you talk or cough or sneeze, especially. You're not spewing as much stuff out. It takes, I'm making up a number, 1,000 viral particles to get somebody infected. If you sit and talk to somebody close to them who doesn't have a mask and has the virus, they are putting out about 20 viral particles with each breath. So you can understand, you got to have a fairly long conversation, 5-10 minutes, to even get it from someone that you know has it. If they have a mask, you cut that, let's say, in half. I'm making up that number.
Because it's actually blocking the particles, or because it's more of a nuisance and I don't want to sneeze when I have a mask on?
You're blocking a fair percentage of the particles depending on how good your mask is.
Okay, well, I guess that's where I would wonder the cloth mask that I've heard doesn't do much versus a more medical mask, and depending on how you wear it, if it's below your nose or above your nose, or
Now, if you wear it below your nose, that's like wearing half a mask. It needs to cover your nose and your mouth.
Huh.
If you're going to use one, go ahead and use one that sort of
So
works.
I'm curious, if you had to go back, what did we get right and what did we get wrong with the way that we've handled this?
Well, Monday morning quarterbacking is kind of a intellectual exercise. You have to go with the information you have. And the information they had was awful. It was really, really frightening. There were these, they had these numbers from Italy and from China that were just terrible. Now, as we learn more, and initially there was no test for this. They had developed testing. And as we started testing more and more people, we found that, hey, a lot of people get exposed, hard to get sick or have a mild sickness. Not everybody gets that really bad stuff. We know that now, but in January, February, you didn't know that.
So maybe to expound on the question a little bit more, if it were to happen again in a year or 2 years and there's another pandemic, quote unquote, that it pops up, what do you feel like would be, what do we learn from this that we could handle it better or have a better outcome?
There's some technical terms that I need to throw at you.
Love it.
And I won't worry with the term itself, but there's this method of measuring how infective something is. And it roughly translated is how many people will one person expose who has the virus. And a regular cold is about 1. But this virus was more like 2, but the initial numbers were like 6. And so there's the concept of it being stronger, infects more people. And until you know that, it's hard to know what to do. Now, I think that if we have another situation like this, there's going to be a lot of people knowing what information to look for, getting it sooner, and maybe better decisions being made because we now have a better system for looking at this. This has been a new experience for the politicians especially. Because the medical people are coming to them and saying, people are going to die.
Yeah, I mean, they had hospitals.
Put their blood on your hands.
They had hospitals built, ventilators built that didn't get used, right? I mean, there's a ship that didn't get used. There's a bunch of ventilators that were being.
No, you're right, Marshall. That there was an overreaction, and I think if you put yourself in the place of the people who had to make these decisions, you sort of go with worst case scenario. And you cross your fingers, it's not going to be that bad.
So we talked a little bit earlier in this podcast about a lot of information that was incorrect or that was over exaggerated maybe or overestimated. Yeah. I'm curious from the medical community side, which is a side of the coin that I don't get a lot of exposure to. Is there a consensus that you feel has been met in the medical community on, is there any information that the public should know that the medical community widely agrees on? Because it seems like there's a lot of politics in this. So what is the truth?
Well, no, that's absolutely right. Politics is involved. The medical community doesn't get along with each other opinion-wise like you might think. There isn't any wide consensus about this. Different doctors have different opinions just like you do. We overreacted, we didn't overreact, we need to do this, no, we should do that. I mean, there's a wide array of opinions out there. And when you're trying to predict the future, that's all you've got is somebody's opinion. And, you're kind of stuck with, what am I supposed to do when the experts don't even know? And that's true. We don't know what the future has to bring. But we do know some things like hand washing and you know, being more careful about passing viruses on to each other. And I think that's why the masks were recommended, because this virus is passed mainly respiratory droplets, and masks do mitigate that. They don't stop it, but they sure slow it down.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think is a timeline that, I mean, I think probably the biggest frustration to a lot of us is this open-ended, specifically by our governor, hey, where there's going to be a shutdown and I don't have a date for you. And then now it's a mask mandate, and I don't know that there's for how long, right? And so if you're speculating and going, hey, well, hopefully this passes and there's no second wave and we've learned a lot more things. And when do you think it's safe? When is going to be a safe time for not all public, but, you know, the mass majority of us Americans?
Well, you know, safety is a relative thing. There's a certain risk to getting on the freeway and driving up to Portland, isn't there?
Right. Yeah.
And of course, the way you drive has some influence on how safe that is or isn't. And I think with respect to a mask and hand washing, that's just being driving in the middle lane rather than the fast lane as hard as you can go. It's being reasonably prudent. I mean, why take unnecessary chances?
Mm-hmm.
That's the way I look at it.
So to piggyback on Marshall's question a little bit, or maybe to ask in a different way, do you have, in your personal opinion, an estimation of a timeline that we think this is going to be affecting us to this degree?
Well, it's affecting us slowly but surely, because in spite of what the governor may or may not say, there are more people out and about. I drive to Portland 3 days a week, and there's just a lot more traffic now than there was 2 months ago when this thing first hit us.
Right.
And you know, and you go out on the streets and go out on the stores, and people are just getting out more than they used to. There's a park out back here. At first, there were a couple people out there. Now we got parties out there. So we're going to see that second wave. Now, is it going to be a real big, steep thing, or just a slow-moving, slow rising thing? And nobody really knows that. But we're going to get a second wave.
I guess it's how we handle that second wave. This first wave, like you said, we got so many things wrong. We shut the economy down. Would you agree that if there's a second wave that we don't need to take such extreme measures that we did take?
I think if we had a similar thing happen in the future, it would be handled differently, because we've learned from this. We've learned some things we did right. We've learned some things we did wrong. I think it would be different. I do hope that with all this publicity, when this vaccine comes out, people will get it, because vaccines really make a difference. They're not a cure-all. They don't save everybody, but you knock it in half. You're talking about 100,000 deaths, and you have 50,000 instead. That's worthwhile. And for every person that died, there's about 10 other people that had to go to the hospital. So it affects all those numbers.
I guess going to a little bit of the beginning, when we talk about vaccines and being mandatory, and there's what's that herd immunity? Can you explain what herd immunity
is? Immunity, yeah, that's hit the news very hard. Here's herd immunity. If 80% of the population is vaccinated against something, you pick what it is, take diphtheria. Well, you're not going to see any diphtheria because people just don't get it enough for it to pass around. There was a time about 20 years ago when the baby shots, DPT, were considered a little bit of a high risk, and so people quit getting them, especially the pertussis part. And sure enough, when they did that, we started seeing a lot of cases of whooping cough that we never saw before. Mm-hmm. So herd immunity means you don't see it because it's not around.
Mm.
So it's not mandated, but 80% of the population felt it was necessary, and there's probably 10% of the population that couldn't get it due to medical reasons, and then there's another 20% that felt like, or 10%, sorry, my math is wacky, that felt like they just didn't want it just because they didn't believe in it.
Yeah, there's only about 1% of people that medically can't get vaccinated.
Okay, so 19% just didn't want it.
Yeah, that's what happened.
Okay.
And they just, and I can understand it. People don't like being told you have to do something.
Mhm.
So I'm curious, in your opinion, is there validity in the concerns? Because one thing I hear a lot about people who are quote unquote anti-vaccination
Yeah.
is they're concerned that there's medical risks with vaccinations and that they're deep running and they'll cause all sorts of syndromes and things like that. Is there validity to that in your opinion, or what?
Listen, that's a great question.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that doctors do to people has some risk to it. There are no exceptions. Drawing your blood has a teeny risk. I've never seen a serious problem from that, but theoretically that could happen. Certainly if I operate on you, any kind of operation, there's risk to that. Vaccines have some risk, and the numbers are roughly 1,000 benefits to 1 risk. And most of the
Specifically
adverse
about
things that
vaccines.
happen, most of the adverse things that happen are minor. A person gets a sore arm, they might get a mild illness for a few days. That's about 99% of the adverse reactions. Deaths from this is, I've never seen a death. I've never heard of a death. It's got to be like 1 in a million. But literally 1 in a million is still a risk. For that person, that's a risk.
I think you've
There's
heard
other
of
things that people worry about
paralyzed.
getting. Yeah, people worry about getting paralyzed or getting autism was a big thing. That's been researched up the wazoo, and autism is not linked to childhood vaccines at all. That's been really
Debunked.
studied very, very diligently.
Hmm.
What later day parents haven't seen is they haven't seen the world where there aren't any vaccines. Childhood deaths used to be really common.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that's a little bit of the problem. I said it with the face masks, or just how much the medical industry got wrong, and everybody's going, well, I don't believe it anymore. And then the flip side of that, with vaccines, people are going, well, I don't ever see measles. I don't see whatever, and you don't see
No.
polio. And so they go, well, I'm not going to vaccinate because I don't even see that anymore. And I've heard the risks, and I read a lot of things on Facebook, and my friends have shared yada, yada, yada with me. And so they don't do it. And then all of a sudden measles popped up in Portland. And all those people that didn't get vaccinated are worried. And not only that, the people who just had newborn babies that I don't think you can get a vaccine until a certain age.
About a year for measles.
A year,
The childhood vaccines, diphtheria, pertussis, rubella, those are pretty standard vaccines.
Right. And so I had a friend that had a baby that was super worried about it because she was the baby was 6 months old, and she's going, I can't even have the vaccine. And all these people who didn't vaccinate are causing a problem now with my kid because the herd immunity doesn't apply if you're not in that 80% realm or something like that.
If you don't get the vaccine, you're at risk. Well, if whatever you're not vaccinated against isn't prevalent in the population, then you're unlikely to get it.
Mm-hmm.
But as more and more people start skipping vaccines, we're gonna lose that herd immunity.
Why are people skipping vaccines right now? What is that? Is that just a trendy thing to do, or is it something
fear.
medical?
It's fear, and it doesn't matter how many letters I have behind my name. What you heard on the internet from your friend has more weight than what I tell you.
Mm-hmm. Life experience.
I'm not meaning you personally, but
sure.
And when somebody's got a new child and they're responsible for this, precious thing, they want to do a good job, and fear somehow drives us. And hopefully you find somebody you can talk to, you can trust.
Well, that's true because, sorry, Aaron, they you see it with newborn babies. You'll have a doctor who says what you should do, and they go, well, I read this book or I did all this research beforehand. You're like, yeah, but I'm a doctor. I have kids. I've seen all this practical stuff that I've actually implemented, but you read a book, so now you're an expert.
Well, and I think to his point too, that a lot of it is ignorance, that people think because it's not common in society anymore that means they don't have to worry about it, which in reality is the exact opposite. So that's an interesting point. I hadn't thought about that. I am curious though, because part of the dissenters of vaccines are, they don't want to do the vaccines based on fear, but then another part, it's like political. So I'm curious in your perspective, Tom, should it be mandated? Like, would you be okay with the government mandating vaccinations?
Well, no, I don't. I don't like the government mandating much of anything. But we allow the government to make speed laws and all kinds of, they influence our lives in all sorts of ways. And the huge majority of those laws are for our benefit. I mean, imagine what the roads would be like if there were no speed laws. It would just be horrible. Mm-hmm. And you don't have to think very far to know every law isn't right. I mean, there are problems with lots of laws. And I don't think that there's a law that you have to get vaccinated. I think what they said was you can't bring your child to school and risk everybody else at school if you don't get them vaccinated. Mm-hmm. So, maybe that's a de facto mandate, but, people homeschool sometimes. Mm-hmm. Childhood vaccines do have a risk, but they are exceeding small.
Yeah, I mean, I think school is a form. It's a backdoor to mandating. Yes, you can homeschool, but if you're a single parent who works, then you don't really have an option, right?
Well, there's always options, but it's just tough being a parent. It really is. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and knowing, I guess, which advice is right and which advice is wrong. And unfortunately, we live in this climate right now that it's just distrusting. I think Aaron and I have talked about this before, where we have a culture right now that unfortunately doesn't believe much of anything right now because they're lied to about so much, whether it's politics, the media, the mainstream media, and then you have these expert doctors that are coming on one news network and one on another. And they're saying opposite things.
That's confusing. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and so they just go, never mind, I'm not going to believe that. And then they find something they like and they latch onto that. And then they feel very opinionated about that. And it just gets it's kind of a tough world we live in. And then you go, okay, well, how do I find where do I find the truth? And especially when it comes to medical stuff, I'm not a medical expert. I have a sister who's a nurse, and so she's close to it. And then we've got some other people that I'm close to that are in it. And so I do hold their opinion in high regard, but sometimes you just have to like look at what's laid out before you, right? And if you looked at
I told you doctors have I told you doctors have trouble agreeing about things, but I mean, all doctors agree vaccines are very helpful and the risk is very small because you're not giving people the germ itself. You're giving them a part of the germ, but it's enough so your immune system can recognize that foreign protein and make antibodies to it and keep you from getting it or getting it too badly.
In your, because you said you practiced for 40 years, 35 years of which was family, did you experience a lot of people who were reluctant to get vaccines, or was that pretty uncommon in your experience?
Well, it was pretty uncommon, but understand that I worked most of that time with Kaiser Permanente, prepaid healthcare. So what kind of people buy healthcare that's prepaid? Well, people that are sort of mainstream. The people that really don't like the vaccines tend to be outliers. For instance, the Russian community in Oregon didn't like vaccines for a very, very long time. And in that little community up there around Woodburn, they had childhood illnesses because they didn't like the vaccines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would be curious as what your reaction was when people said no.
You say, this is your right and your decision, but that's not what I recommend. I'm not going to make you do anything, but I'm just going to give you my honest opinion.
I could see your eyes rolling as you're telling him, sign here for...
Yeah, if my doctor made that face, I would just do whatever he told me to do. But I do think that on the political side of it, because I think that some people don't have a strong opinion medically about vaccines. And I'm one of them where I go, I'd probably get any vaccine needed because I'm not that afraid of them. But I go, I wonder sometimes if politically I should be allowing these things to be so heavily pushed by government mandates. And I think the answer to that I came to is that, anytime there's an externality with anything, I think we have the right to have the government protect us from that. So things can be produced. But I think if there's a negative externality, that we have the right to get the government involved. And I'm with you that I don't agree the government should be involved in much of anything. But there are a lot of situations in markets and in economies where negative externalities are produced, and without government intervention, there would be these externalities are going to run rampant. And I think vaccines fit directly into that paradigm.
Well, understand, I don't think that there is any kind of strong political support to mandate vaccines. Now, I currently practice in a prison, and we recommend the flu vaccine to people. We push it, we offer it to them. We do not make them do it. But we say, here's what's good for you, and we'll make it easy as we can. And we still get at least 20-30% of people saying, no, I'm not going to do it. It's their decision, We don't make them.
I've never done a flu vaccine, and I'm not sure I'm too keen on.
I get one every year, Marshall.
You get one every year? Oh, okay.
I sure do. I'm high risk for exposure. Now you're meeting the public, so you're at some risk.
Well,
yeah, Marshall, you sound like you're just benefiting from the rest of us who are getting it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I already believe that I had coronavirus, so I feel like I have so many antibodies, it's ridiculous.
Isn't that funny how many people say that they think they've already had it and they have no idea, really?
Well, there would be no way of knowing.
There is a test.
Yeah.
It's an IgG antibody test, and you can find out.
What is your feeling on those tests? I've heard inaccuracies, different results depending on what kind of test you do.
Oh, this is an excellent question. Well, there are several different kinds of tests. So there's a test to see if you have it, and that test has high false positive, false negatives depending on how you obtain the specimen and how the specimen's handled. Let's get past that because that's a really complex discussion. Now, if you've been exposed and you didn't get sick, or maybe you had a mild sick illness, and you want to know, hey, do I have protective antibodies? That's called an IgG antibody. Now, that takes something like 6 weeks from the time you get exposure to develop that. There's an IgM antibody that will show up in the first 2 weeks, but then it goes away, and the IgG is the one that gives you long-term information. But you have to wait several weeks, like 6 weeks from the time you think you've had it to get that test done, or it won't show much of anything. And then that test needs to be quantitative. It's not a yes-no test. You get a number, and then somebody has to interpret that number. And I'm not familiar with the details of the numbers to tell you that. It's not a yes-no test.
And then, so how are they so certain when people die that they died of the COVID-19?
Well, that's a really, really technical question. And of course, in many cases, it's very obvious. Someone comes in with the specific signs and symptoms, and they also develop certain X-ray changes and lab values that all go along with that. And that person is reacting exactly like they had COVID-19. They're likely to have a positive culture, or a PCR test it's called, but they may not, depending on when you caught them. Well, you're still going to sign your death certificate, viral illness, because they fit all the characteristics. But 90% of the time, it's pretty obvious one way or the other. Who's got a canary singing in the microphone?
I think that's Aaron. He's in the backyard just enjoying the summer for the few days that we have it, apparently.
I don't blame you, Aaron.
It's
been great.
Sorry.
These few days.
I feel really underprepared now. I've got the lawnmower and the birds.
He's got, well, you can play guess the sound that is going on in Aaron's house. He's got sliding doors, but it's not a baby in the crying in the background. So
yeah, no, that's not.
I'm really thrilled for you having this new baby. It's gonna open up a whole new area of life you never knew before.
Yeah, it already is. And it's interesting because I was telling Marshall I put off having kids for a long time, and he's known me a long time, and I've been very skeptical about when's the right time and when am I ready. And finally I just said, all right, I think it's time. I'm getting older. It's time to have a kid. And then I did it of all years in 2020 when the economy crashed and the pandemic came out, and I thought, wow, I really picked the right time.
Well, it'll work out.
Well,
yeah, you'll do a good job. You're a thoughtful father.
Tom, I'd love to cap it off here, but I just want to ask a couple final questions here. First to Aaron, if it was mandated to get a COVID-19 vaccine, would you get it? If it was mandated?
I would really struggle to submit to the government, but I think that I believe in the vaccination enough that
Okay.
it would
So
be a
then I
struggle.
guess it goes without saying that if it wasn't mandated, you'd get it anyway, or no?
Yes. Yeah, I
Okay.
would.
All right. All right. Tom,
I would too, by the way.
you would get it? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And no reluctancy whatsoever in your.
No.
And what would you say to a person like me that's who I guess heavily disagrees on that and goes, "No, I'm not doing that." First of all, I don't like when somebody says I have to do something. That's like a trigger moment for me where I go, I don't have a good reason yet, but I'll think of one. And then, or maybe I have thought about one. And like for me, I have an autoimmune disease. I'm not supposed to get live vaccines. So I don't know that.
These aren't live vaccines.
Okay, well then maybe I can get one, but also I still don't like it. So what would you say to somebody like me who doesn't want to get one?
Well, I don't like them either. I get them because I see the benefit.
And I guess a vaccine that's developed so quickly and pushed
Marshall, let's go back to that just for a second.
Sure.
You weren't around, but I was around when seatbelt laws came out.
Yeah, you probably didn't like that, huh?
Now they left it optional for several years, and such a small percentage of people using seatbelts regularly that they then mandated it. And the not just the death rate from motor vehicle accidents plummeted, but so did injuries. And I was in practice during that time and saw that kind of change. Now, they didn't want to mandate it, but they felt like they sort of needed to. And it turns out they were right about that in the sense of being, from a medical point of view, they were right. Now, you can make a libertarian argument about it that they were wrong in an esoterical sense, and I think that's true. But I still saw the benefit from. I wouldn't want to mandate that kind of stuff. I certainly wouldn't want vaccines to be mandated.
Yeah.
But they certainly should be educated and make it easy.
Yeah, I kind of like that approach where, I think you come out with a vaccine, now everybody feels comfortable, the guard's down, and then in a few years, it's more like, hey, if you want to get into this school or this college, these are what's required. And if that's what comes down the pipeline, I could probably swallow that and get on board with it. But right now, I'm not.
Well, I think that it's interesting, too, because out of 1,000 people, I would bet 800 at least would say, I don't want the government mandating anything. And I would be right there with them. And yet when the government mandated that we shut down the economy, basically everybody complied. We all complained, but we complied.
We didn't have much choice.
Yeah. Well, so I think that enlightened me a little bit to how patriotic we really are and how much we're really willing to harken back to 1776 and fight the government. I realize now we're really not that willing to do that.
Well, there's a lot of this fatigue going on, and I can see people are going to come out of their holes and start doing stuff anyway, whether the government says so or not.
Yeah.
Right.
And from a technical point of view in the state of Oregon, the governor doesn't have the legal right to tell you have to wear a mask. I mean,
I've wondered that. Same thing.
I'm not a lawyer, okay? I'm not a lawyer.
But you're recommending as a doctor that we should be.
I am recommending it.
Yeah. Well, that's disappointing because I was really hoping that I didn't that wouldn't happen. So
Marshall,
I was hoping you were going to set me free.
I think when you're outdoors, it's much less important. But when you're indoors, especially talking to someone closely, that's when you can give them your illness or they can give you theirs. And by the way, we're hoping to see just the rate of all viral illnesses going down from this, not just COVID-19.
Well, that's I love your take on it, Tom. I love your opinions on it, and I'm sure we'll get a lot of feedback based off of it. So I appreciate you coming on and giving us giving us all your feedback on it from definitely an expert opinion. So, and not ours. So I really, thank you, Tom.
That's fine. Nice to meet you, Aaron. What's the baby's name?
His name is Matthew. We went pretty generic. We went
biblical. That's what you went.
That's it. When you name your child, you want to picture high school graduation night and this child marching across the stage, and you don't want to hear "Stormy Dawn." I'm not kidding you.
That's the most solid device of the night, right there.
Okay, very, very good.
Thanks,
See y'all
Tom.
later.
Bye.
You bet. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.